The screen is black. An old man's voice breaks the silence, weathered, tired, honest. People ask if I was brave that day in France. I wasn't. I was just tired of watching boys die for stupid reasons. The darkness holds for 3 more seconds, then light. France, August 9th, 1944. The jeep had been blocking the road for exactly 7 minutes. Sergeant Jack Morrison knew this because he had been counting. 7 minutes while his men sat exposed on a narrow road with German guns somewhere in the hills ahead. 7 minutes wasted while an American colonel argued with his driver about a map. Morrison was 32 years old. His face was dark from sun and dirt. His hands were calloused from digging foxholes and carrying wounded men. His eyes were the worst part. They looked older than the rest of him. Much older. He sat in a shallow ditch beside the road and watched the seconds pass. The jeep sat there, blocking everything. Behind Morrison, 80 men waited. They were spread out along the roadside in whatever cover they could find. Ditches, hedgerows, shallow depressions in the earth. They stayed low. They watched the tree line. They kept their rifles ready. They were good soldiers. Morrison had trained most of them himself. The American colonel stood beside his jeep, pointing at the map. He was tall, over 6 feet. His uniform was clean, too clean for this part of France. His hands moved across the map like he was giving a lecture. Morrison reached into his breast pocket. His fingers found a small notebook. He did not take it out. He just touched it, felt the worn leather cover. Inside that notebook were 40 names, written in pencil. His handwriting. 40 boys who had started this campaign with him 2 months ago. 40 boys who were not coming home. He thought about those names while he counted. 8 minutes now. The memory came without warning. It always did. France. Different France. 1918. Morrison was 16 years old. He had lied about his age to enlist, said he was 18. The recruiting sergeant had known. Everyone knew. But they needed bodies for the trenches, so nobody asked questions. He remembered standing in a communications trench near Amiens. 30 men in his platoon, waiting for the order to attack. Lieutenant Bradford stood at the front, 22 years old, fresh from officer training. He held a map in shaking hands. "We wait," Bradford said. "We wait for confirmation from battalion." Private Morrison had looked over the trench wall. He could see the German position, a farmhouse, 2 machine gun nests, maybe 20 Germans total. He looked at his watch, then at the eastern horizon. The sun was coming up. In another hour they would lose the darkness. The Germans would see them clearly. "Sir," Morrison had whispered to the corporal beside him, "we should go now, while it's still dark." The corporal nodded. He thought so too. Lieutenant Bradford heard them. His head snapped around. "Silence! We follow orders. We wait for confirmation." So they waited. 10 minutes, 15, 20. The sun rose. The Germans saw them. Morrison remembered the sound, that terrible shriek of incoming artillery, the earth erupting, the screams. When it stopped, 7 men were still alive out of 30. Morrison had crawled through the mud looking for survivors. He found Lieutenant Bradford in a crater. The shell had torn him in half. He was still holding the map. Blood soaked through the paper, orders that never came. 23 boys died waiting for permission to do what they already knew needed to be done. Morrison was one of the 7 who walked away. He never forgot Bradford's face, the confusion in his dying eyes, like he could not understand what had gone wrong. The memory faded. Morrison was back in 1944, back on this French road, back to counting. 9 minutes. He looked at Colonel Brennan standing beside the jeep. Tall, clean uniform, hands on a map. Morrison's hands started to shake, just slightly. He pressed them against his knees until they stopped. Not again, not this time. The war had found him again in 1939. Morrison had been back in Saskatchewan for 20 years, working his family's farm, planting wheat, raising cattle, trying to forget the trenches. He had a wife, Mary. They had married in 1923. She was a good woman, patient. She never asked him about the war. She saw how he woke up sometimes in the middle of the night, gasping, reaching for a rifle that was not there. September 1939. The radio announced it. War in Europe, Germany invading Poland, Britain declaring war, Canada following. Mary found Morrison in the barn that evening. He was cleaning tools he had already cleaned. "You're going back," she said. Not a question. She knew. Yes. Why? Morrison set down the wrench he was holding. He looked at his hands, farmer's hands now. The calluses were different, softer. "Because I know what happens when the wrong men lead," he said. "I know what it costs." She cried. He held her, but he went anyway. By 1940, Morrison was a sergeant, training new recruits at Camp Borden in Ontario. They were so young. 18, 19, 20. Boys trying to be men. Excited about adventure, about seeing the world, about doing their duty. Morrison taught them how to survive, how to dig a proper foxhole, how to move under fire, how to tell the difference between incoming and outgoing artillery by the sound. He did not teach them about glory. Glory was a lie told by men who had never seen what high explosive does to a human body. One of the recruits asked him once, "Sergeant, were you scared in the last war?" Morrison had looked at the boy, 18 years old, smooth face, bright eyes. "Every single day," Morrison said, "and I'm going to teach you to be scared too. Scared keeps you alive. Brave gets you killed." June 6th, 1944, Juneau Beach. Morrison hit the sand with the first wave, the South Saskatchewan Regiment. He led his company off the landing craft into water that was red with blood. The noise was impossible. Artillery, machine guns, mortars, men screaming, landing craft exploding, the endless crash of waves. Morrison had been here before. Different beach, different war, same hell. He moved forward because that was the only direction that mattered. His company followed. Some of them made it to the seawall, some did not. By nightfall, they had taken their objectives. Morrison sat in a German bunker that smelled like cordite and death. He pulled out his notebook, started writing names, 12 names on the first day. He had started with 120 men. August 1944 was worse. The hedgerow country of Normandy was a butcher's yard. Every field, every lane, every stone wall. The Germans fought for every meter. Morrison's company ground forward. They took casualties every day. A sniper here, a mortar there, a machine gun position that nobody saw until it opened fire. The notebook filled up. Morrison wrote letters to families, 40 letters in 2 months. He used the same words every time because there were no good words for this. "Your son died bravely in the service of his country." It was a lie. Most of them died screaming for their mothers. But Morrison wrote it anyway because mothers needed something to hold on to. Every night he read through the names in his notebook. 40 names. He made himself remember their faces. It was the least he could do. The company was down to 80 men now, 80 survivors pulled from 3 different companies that had been destroyed. These were the last ones. The ones who had been lucky so far. Morrison looked at them and saw ghosts. Boys who did not know they were already dead, just waiting for the bullet or shell that had their name on it. He was so tired, not physically tired, though he was that too, tired in his soul, tired of making decisions that got people killed, tired of writing names in notebooks, tired of being right when being right still meant boys died. But he kept going, because somebody had to, because these 80 men trusted him to get them home, because if he quit, some other sergeant would inherit this company and this notebook and these names, and that sergeant would not know them yet, would not remember their faces. Morrison knew their faces, all of them. That was his burden, his responsibility, his curse, which brought him here, to this road, to this jeep, to this moment. 10 minutes now, the mission was clear. Intelligence said there was a German position 5 kilometers up this road, 1 platoon, maybe 35 Germans. Machine guns, mortars, dug in around a crossroads, lightly defended for now. But German reinforcements were moving in the area. The window to take that position was small. Maybe an hour, maybe less. Morrison's company was supposed to link up with armor support and hit it fast. Take it before the Germans could reinforce. Standard operation. But they could not link up with anything while this jeep sat in the middle of the only road forward. Morrison watched Colonel Brennan point at the map. The colonel's driver looked frustrated. They had been having the same conversation for 10 minutes. Brennan was lost. That was obvious. He was supposed to be verifying road conditions for General Bradley's logistics staff. Simple job. Drive the road, check the map, report back. But somewhere he had gotten turned around, and now he was stopped in the middle of a tactical road during an active operation trying to figure out where he was. Morrison could see the map from where he sat. He could see the route marked on it, could see exactly where they were. The road was clearly labeled. Brennan was not stupid, he was scared. Scared men made stupid decisions. Morrison knew that. He had been that scared man once, but he could not afford to care about Brennan's fear right now. 11 minutes. Morrison stood up. His knees popped. Everything hurt these days. He walked toward the jeep. His boots crunched on gravel. Brennan looked up, saw him coming. The colonel's face showed annoyance, and something else, relief, maybe, that someone was approaching, that he did not have to make this decision alone. "Can I help you, Sergeant?" The way Brennan said Sergeant made it clear he did not want help from someone below his rank. But there was uncertainty underneath. Morrison heard it. He had heard that tone before, in Lieutenant Bradford's voice, in other young officers who found themselves in situations they did not understand. "Yes, sir," Morrison said. His voice was calm, flat. "You can get out of my way." Brennan's face flushed red. "Excuse me?" "You're blocking the road, sir. My company needs to pass. We have a timed objective and we're already running late." The colonel straightened up to his full height. He was much taller than Morrison, at least 6 inches. He used the height like a weapon. "I'm coordinating with my headquarters, Sergeant. You will wait until I'm finished." Morrison looked at him, really looked at him, saw the clean uniform, the soft hands, the fear hiding behind the authority. He thought about the notebook in his pocket. 40 names, boys who died because someone made the wrong call, or the right call too late, or no call at all. He thought about the 80 men spread out along this road, exposed, vulnerable, waiting. He thought about Lieutenant Bradford holding that blood-soaked map. "Sir," Morrison said quietly, with respect, we don't have time to wait." Well, Brennan's jaw tightened. "That's not your decision to make." "No, sir. It's yours. And you're making the wrong one." The words hung in the air between them. Brennan's face went from red to purple. "How dare you?" "I've been fighting Germans for 2 months in this campaign," Morrison interrupted. His voice was still quiet, still calm. But there was something underneath now, something hard. 6 months before that in Italy. "You got here, what, 3 weeks ago? A month? That's irrelevant. You're lost on a road that's clearly marked on your map." Morrison pointed at the paper in Brennan's hands. You're blocking the advance of an entire company because you can't figure out where you are. And you're doing it in a way that's exposing my men to German artillery observation." Brennan opened his mouth to speak. Morrison kept going. "I've tried being polite. I've tried being respectful. But here's the reality, Colonel. I'm going to accomplish my mission. That mission requires moving down this road in the next 60 seconds. You can move your Jeep voluntarily, or I can have my men move it for you. But either way, we're getting through." The silence that followed was complete. Morrison's men, watching from the ditches, went still. The Colonel's driver stared with wide eyes. Even the wind seemed to stop. Brennan found his voice. It shook with rage. "You're threatening a superior officer. That's insubordination. That's court-martial material. I'll have you brought up on charges so fast." "Then do it," Morrison said. "After we take the objective, after my men are safe, after the mission is complete, you can court-martial me all you want, sir, but first, get out of my goddamn way." He did not say it with anger. He said it with exhaustion, like a man who had run out of patience for stupidity, like a man who had seen too many people die for reasons that did not matter. Brennan stared at him. Morrison could see the calculation happening, could see the Colonel weighing his options, pride versus mission, authority versus reality. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Morrison reached into his breast pocket, pulled out the notebook, opened it. He did not say anything, just held it, where Brennan could see 40 names written in pencil, 40 boys who were not coming home. Brennan looked at the notebook, looked at Morrison's face, saw something there that made him stop. Morrison was not angry, he was not defiant, he was just done. Done with this conversation, done with this delay, done with watching boys die because someone could not make a decision. Brennan's hands were shaking. He looked down at the map, looked at the road ahead, looked back at Morrison. "You'll regret this, Sergeant," Brennan said quietly. "When this is over, I'm filing a formal complaint with your chain of command. You're finished in this army." "Noted, sir. Now move your Jeep." Brennan gestured to his driver. The engine started. The Jeep pulled to the side of the road. Morrison turned back to his company, raised his hand, made a forward motion. As the first men rose from the ditches, Morrison heard it. A sound that made his blood freeze. The distant crack of a radio transmission coming from the hills to the east. Morrison's head snapped around, scanned the tree line. There, a glint of sunlight on glass. Binoculars, or a scope. The Germans had been watching the entire time. Morrison's jaw tightened. 13 minutes they had sat on this road. 13 minutes for German artillery observers to call in coordinates, to prepare a fire mission. If they had waited any longer, his company would have been caught in the open. 80 men, no cover. A perfect target. He had been right, not just tactically, but desperately, urgently right. Morrison did not feel vindicated. He felt sick. They had been 30 seconds from death, maybe less. 80 men moved past the American Jeep in tactical formation, weapons ready, eyes scanning, moving with the efficiency of soldiers who had done this many times before. Morrison fell in with them. He did not look back at Colonel Brennan. He had said what needed to be said, done what needed to be done. Now he had a mission to complete. The notebook went back in his breast pocket. 40 names. He could feel the weight of it against his chest, could feel each name like a stone. Behind him, Colonel Brennan sat in his Jeep. Morrison heard the scratch of pen on paper. The colonel was writing something. The complaint, probably. Morrison did not care. He had 80 men to get home. That was all that mattered. The assault began at 14:30 hours. Morrison's company linked up with the armor support 2 kilometers from the objective. 3 Sherman tanks, American crews. They looked at Morrison with cautious respect. Word had already spread about the incident on the road. The tank commander was a captain, young, maybe 25. He climbed down from his turret and walked over to Morrison. "Sergeant, heard you had some trouble with one of our colonels." Morrison did not look up from his map. "No trouble, sir. Just a disagreement about timing." The captain smiled slightly. "Well, your timing better be good. Intelligence says we've got maybe 40 minutes before German reinforcements arrive from the east. Then we better not waste any of them." Morrison briefed his platoon leaders. The plan was simple. Basic infantry tactics, nothing fancy. 2 platoons would assault from the west under covering fire from the Shermans. The 3rd platoon would swing north and cut off any retreat. Standard, professional, the kind of operation they had done dozens of times. His men moved into position without being told. They knew their jobs. Morrison had trained them well, or the ones who survived the training had learned well. Same thing, really. Morrison checked his watch, checked the sun, calculated shadows and angles of fire. 5 minutes, he said quietly. The word passed down the line. 5 minutes. Morrison pulled out his notebook, opened it to a blank page. He always did this before an assault, prepared the page, just in case. He hoped he would not need it. He always hoped that. The hope never helped. The Shermans opened fire at exactly 14:35. The German position erupted in smoke and dust. 3 heavy machine guns, good positions, professional work. The Germans knew what they were doing. Morrison's first 2 platoons moved forward under the covering fire. They used the smoke, moved in bounds, one section advancing while another provided covering fire. It was textbook, perfect execution. Then the Germans opened up. Machine gun fire ripped through the smoke. Morrison heard the impacts, the screams, the familiar sounds of men being hit. He moved forward with the 3rd platoon. They swung north as planned, caught the Germans from the flank. A German soldier appeared in a doorway. Young, maybe 18, he raised his rifle. Morrison shot him twice. Center mass. The German went down. Morrison did not stop moving, did not think about it. There would be time for thinking later. Right now, there was only the mission, only the objective, only the next decision, and the one after that. The fighting became close. House to house, room to room, Germans in the rubble, Canadians pushing forward, grenades, rifle fire, the wet sound of steel hitting flesh. 30 minutes of fighting, then it was over. The Germans who could retreat did. The ones who could not surrendered or died where they stood. Morrison's company secured the crossroads, set up defensive positions, called in the casualties, 3 killed, 5 wounded. Morrison walked among the bodies while his men established the perimeter. He needed to see them, needed to know who had not made it. The first was Private Henderson, 19 years old, from Nova Scotia. Morrison had personally recruited him from the training depot 6 months ago. Henderson lay on his back in the rubble, eyes open, staring at nothing. A single bullet hole in his chest, right through the heart. He had died instantly. That was something at least. No suffering? Morrison knelt beside him, reached for the dog tags. His hands shook slightly as he lifted them over Henderson's head. The tags were still warm. Morrison searched Henderson's pockets, found a letter, unsealed, ready to be mailed. The handwriting was careful. Neat. "Dear Ma, Sergeant Morrison says we'll be home by Christmas." I believe him. He's never lied to us. The fighting is hard, but we have good leadership. Don't worry about me. I'm safe with Morrison's company. Love, Robert. Morrison folded the letter carefully, put it in his own pocket. He would send it to Henderson's mother with his condolence letter. Or maybe he would not send it at all. Maybe she did not need to know that her son had believed a lie. Morrison had never promised anyone they would be home by Christmas. He had never promised anything except that he would do his best to keep them alive. But Henderson had believed anyway, had needed to believe, had told his mother he was safe, and now he was dead. Morrison stood up, moved to the next body, then the next. Each one got the same treatment. Dog tags, personal effects. A moment of silence that was not really silence because the war did not stop for grief. 3 names. 3 boys who would not see Christmas, would not see home, would not see anything except the inside of a coffin if they were lucky enough to be recovered. Morrison pulled out his notebook, opened to the blank page he had prepared, started writing. Henderson, McAllister, Kowalski, 43 names now. The defensive positions were established by 1600 hours. Morrison sat in what used to be a German machine gun nest. The sandbags were still warm from the afternoon sun. He could smell cordite and blood and dust. One of his lieutenants approached, young man, maybe 23. He had been with the company for 3 weeks, was still learning. Sergeant, the wounded are evacuated, ammunition is distributed, observation posts are set. Morrison nodded. Good work. The lieutenant hesitated. Permission to speak freely? Go ahead. The men are saying you stood up to an American colonel today, made him move his jeep so we could get here on time. Morrison did not look up from the map he was studying. The men talk too much. They also say that's why we took this position, because you didn't let that colonel delay us, because you made the call. Morrison finally looked at the lieutenant, saw the admiration there, the hero worship, the dangerous belief that Morrison had done something brave. Lieutenant, do you know why we took 3 casualties instead of 30? The young officer blinked. Because we got here before the Germans reinforced. That's right. We got here with 40 minutes to spare. If we had waited another 20 minutes on that road, the Germans would have had a full company here. Maybe more. We would have taken heavy casualties, maybe failed the mission entirely. Morrison paused. Let that sink in. But we also took 3 casualties because we got here at all. Henderson, McAllister, Kowalski. They died taking this position. The lieutenant looked confused. But the mission was successful, that's true. We did what we were ordered to do. We took the objective with acceptable casualties. The word acceptable is doing a lot of work there. Morrison pulled out Henderson's letter, handed it to the lieutenant. Read this. The young officer read. His face went pale. He thought he was safe, the lieutenant said quietly. They all think they're safe. They think good leadership means nobody dies, but that's not what leadership means. Leadership means making decisions with incomplete information and then living with what happens. Morrison took the letter back, put it in his pocket again. I made a decision today. I confronted that colonel. I forced the issue. We got here on time. 3 men died. If I had not confronted him, we would have arrived late. Maybe 20 or 30 men would have died, maybe more. He looked at the lieutenant directly. So did I make the right decision? Did I save lives? Or did I just choose which 3 men would die today? The lieutenant had no answer. Morrison did not expect one. There was no answer. That was the point. The men want to believe I'm a hero, Morrison said, that I stood up to authority and saved them all. But Henderson's mother is going to get a letter saying her son is dead. McAllister's father, Kowalski's wife. They're not going to think I'm a hero. But you saved the others. Maybe, probably. I don't know. I'll never know. That's what command is, Lieutenant. Making the best guess you can, and then carrying the weight of every name that comes after. Morrison stood up. The conversation was over. Get some rest. We've got a long night ahead. The lieutenant saluted and left. Morrison sat back down, alone now. He pulled out the notebook. Read through all 43 names, slowly, pronouncing each one in his head. He wondered how many more names he would add before this war ended. He wondered if he would run out of pages. The story spread faster than Morrison expected. By evening, every Canadian unit in the sector knew about it. By the next morning, The Americans knew too. The details changed with each telling. Some versions had Morrison drawing his pistol, others had him physically moving the jeep himself. One particularly creative version involved Morrison punching the colonel in the face. None of it was true, but truth did not matter. The story had taken on a life of its own. Morrison tried to ignore it. He had work to do, men to lead, positions to hold, but the story followed him everywhere. Canadian soldiers would call out to him when he passed. "That's the sergeant who told off the American colonel." Some would salute, others would just nod with respect. American soldiers had mixed reactions. Some looked at him with admiration, others with cold resentment. Morrison understood both. He had embarrassed one of their officers. That would sting regardless of who was right. 3 days after the incident, Morrison was summoned to battalion headquarters. Battalion headquarters was set up in a requisitioned farmhouse 3 kilometers behind the line. The building still had most of its roof. That made it luxury accommodation by current standards. Major Patterson was waiting in what had been the farmer's study. He sat behind a field desk covered in maps and reports. He was 43 years old, a veteran of the First War. Morrison knew his reputation: fair, competent, unsympathetic to bullshit from any source. "Sergeant Morrison reporting as ordered, sir." Patterson looked up. His face was unreadable. "Sit down, Morrison." Morrison sat. Patterson opened a folder on his desk, pulled out 2 documents, set them side by side. "I've received 2 reports about you. I want you to read them both." He slid the first document across the desk. Morrison recognized the handwriting immediately. Formal, precise, officer's script. Formal complaint. Subject: Sergeant J. Morrison, South Saskatchewan Regiment. On the 9th of August 1944, Sergeant Morrison demonstrated gross insubordination toward a superior officer. He threatened and verbally abused Colonel David Brennan, U.S. First Army, and forced said officer to move his vehicle under duress. This behavior is unbecoming of a non-commissioned officer and undermines the alliance between American and Canadian forces. I request immediate disciplinary action. Signed, Colonel David Brennan, Logistics Staff, First Army. Morrison set it down. "Yes, sir, that's accurate." Patterson raised an eyebrow. "You're admitting to insubordination?" "I'm admitting to the facts as stated. I did confront Colonel Brennan. I did tell him to move his vehicle. I did threaten to have my men move it if he refused." "And you understand that's grounds for court-martial?" "Yes, sir." Patterson slid the second document across the desk. "Read this one." The handwriting was different, American, less formal. "After action observation, on August 9, 1944, I witnessed an interaction between Sergeant J. Morrison, Canadian Forces, and Colonel D. Brennan, U.S. Army. Colonel Brennan's vehicle was blocking a tactical road during active operations. Sergeant Morrison requested passage multiple times in a respectful manner. When Colonel Brennan refused, Sergeant Morrison assessed the tactical situation and made the decision to proceed. His tone was harsh, but his judgment was sound. The mission was time-critical. I observed the subsequent assault on the German position, textbook execution, minimal casualties, objectives secured ahead of German reinforcements. In my professional opinion, Sergeant Morrison's tactical assessment was correct, and his actions, while insubordinate in form, were justified by operational necessity. Signed, Captain James Walsh, 2nd Armored Division. Morrison looked up. "An American officer wrote this?" "He did. Captain Walsh has a reputation for honesty. Some would say excessive honesty. He calls things as he sees them regardless of politics." Patterson leaned back in his chair. "So here's my problem, Morrison. I have one report saying you committed a court-martial offense. I have another report saying you made the tactically correct decision. I also have your after-action report. 3 killed, 5 wounded, objective secured, mission successful." He paused. "The question is, did those 3 men die because of your decision to proceed, or in spite of it? Morrison thought about that, really thought about it. Not the political answer, not the answer that would save his career. The true answer. "I don't know, sir. I'll never know." Patterson blinked. He had clearly expected a different response. "Explain." "If we had waited longer, the Germans would have reinforced. We might have taken 20 or 30 casualties. Or we might have failed the mission entirely. But I don't know that for certain. I was working with intelligence estimates and tactical assumptions." Morrison's voice was steady, calm, the voice of a man who had thought about this many times before. "What I know is this. I made the decision I thought was right with the information I had. 3 men died. Maybe they would have died anyway. Maybe different men would have died. Maybe more, maybe none. I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." Patterson leaned back in his chair. His face was distant, remembering something. "Every commander carries names, Morrison. Men who died under their orders. Some decisions were right, some were wrong. Most will never know which." He paused. "The burden isn't making the decision, it's living with it afterward, wondering, always wondering." Morrison nodded slowly. He understood that, understood it too well. Patterson picked up both documents, held them for a moment. "I'm filing your report as mission success with acceptable casualties. Colonel Brennan's complaint will be forwarded to Canadian Corps headquarters. They'll handle the politics with the Americans. And my status, sir. You go back to your company and keep doing your job. Unless Corps decides otherwise, this matter is closed at battalion level." Morrison stood, saluted. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me, Morrison. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm just making another decision that I'll have to live with." Patterson opened the folder again, started writing. "One more thing. Off the record." Morrison paused. "You did the right thing on that road, tactically speaking, but the day you make that kind of decision and the mission fails, the day you gamble and lose, they'll crucify you. Remember that." "I will, sir." Morrison left the office, walked out into the afternoon sun. Morrison walked back toward his company's position. His mind was already moving to the next problem, the next decision, the next calculation of risk and reward. The notebook rested against his chest. 43 names. That evening, Morrison sat in his position and wrote to Henderson's mother. He did not use Henderson's letter, could not use it. The boy's hope and trust felt like an accusation. Instead, Morrison wrote the same letter he had written 43 times before. "Dear Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. It is my duty to inform you that your son, Private Robert Henderson, was killed in action on the 9th of August, 1944. He died bravely in the service of his country. He was a good soldier and a credit to his regiment. Please accept my deepest condolences for your loss." The words meant nothing. They were the same words he had written for every other family, but they were all he had to give. He sealed the letter, set it aside. Morrison sat in the gathering darkness and listened to the sounds of his company settling in for the night. 300 kilometers away, Colonel David Brennan sat in his office at 1st Army headquarters. He had spent the last 3 days angry, humiliated, replaying the confrontation over and over in his mind. But something had shifted. Brennan pulled out his personal journal, started writing. "August 12, 1944, I have filed a formal complaint against Sergeant Morrison. It is the correct action according to military protocol, but I find myself uncertain." He paused, pen hovering over paper. "The sergeant was insubordinate, that is fact, but he was also right. I was lost, I was scared, I was blocking their mission because I could not admit I did not know what I was doing." Brennan wrote for another 10 minutes. The words came easier now. "I have spent my military career in logistics, supply chains, inventory management. I am good at it. But I had no business being on that road. No business making tactical decisions in a combat zone. Morrison saw that immediately. I should have seen it too. He closed the journal, sat in silence. 3 days later, Brennan requested a transfer, not away from the front, toward it. He asked to be assigned to a forward supply unit, where he could see firsthand what his logistics decisions meant, where he could understand the cost of delays and inefficiencies. His request was denied. He was too valuable where he was, but he kept trying. Instead, Brennan reorganized his entire approach. He began visiting frontline units, talking to sergeants and lieutenants, understanding their needs, their timelines, their reality. He cut red tape, bypassed procedures when necessary, got ammunition and medical supplies moving faster. Every time he made a decision that saved time, he thought about Morrison, about 80 men waiting on a road, about the weight a leader carried. By war's end, Brennan had reorganized the entire supply chain for First Army, reduced delivery times by 40%, saved countless lives by getting critical supplies to the front faster. He never met Morrison again, never apologized directly, but every time he cut a delay, every time he bypassed red tape to get supplies moving, he thought about that Canadian sergeant, about the look in his eyes, the weight he carried, about what it meant to be responsible for lives instead of paperwork. Morrison had taught him that, on a dusty French road, with 3 words and a notebook full of names. Brennan would spend the rest of the war trying to prove he had learned the lesson. The summons came 1 week later. Morrison was checking defensive positions when the courier arrived, a young corporal from division headquarters. "Sergeant Morrison, you're to report to Brigadier General Keller immediately." The ride to division headquarters took 40 minutes. Morrison sat in the jeep and watched the countryside pass. He thought about what Keller might say, what decision had been made about his future. He found he did not care much either way. He was too tired to care. Brigadier General Rod Keller had his headquarters in a chateau that had somehow survived mostly intact. Morrison was escorted to what had been a library. Shelves of books lined the walls. Military maps covered a large table in the center. Keller stood at the window, looking out, his back to the door. "Sergeant Morrison reporting as ordered, sir." Keller did not turn around. "Sit down, Morrison." Morrison sat, waited. The silence stretched out. 30 seconds, a minute. Keller just stood there. Finally, Keller spoke. Still not turning around. "I've read 3 reports about you. Brennan's complaint, Walsh's defense, Patterson's assessment." Another pause. "I've also read your service record. First war, Second war, 26 years between them. Most men would have stayed home, stayed safe. You came back." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Morrison thought about that, about the real answer. "Because I know what happens when the wrong men lead, sir. I've seen it. I couldn't stay home knowing what was coming." Keller finally turned around. His face was hard, scarred. A thin line ran down his left cheek from some old wound. His eyes were older than his 48 years. "The wrong men," Keller repeated. "You think Colonel Brennan was the wrong man?" "I think he was the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time, sir. He's probably excellent at logistics, but he shouldn't have been on that road blocking tactical movement during active operations." Keller walked to the table, sat down across from Morrison. "I'm going to tell you a story, Morrison. August 1917, Passchendaele. I was a lieutenant. My captain ordered us to wait for artillery support before attacking a German position." Keller's voice was flat, emotionless. "I could see Germans reinforcing the position while we waited. I could see our window closing. The artillery support wasn't coming. We all knew it wasn't coming. But the captain was following orders from battalion." He paused. "So I took my platoon and attacked anyway. Without orders, without permission, we took the position, lost 12 men doing it. Morrison listened, said nothing. My captain filed charges against me for disobeying direct orders, insubordination, reckless endangerment, the whole list. What happened, sir? My colonel tore up the charges, promoted me to captain. He said, a good officer knows when the rules serve the mission and when they don't. Then he sent me back to the line. Keller leaned back in his chair. 27 years later, I still think about those 12 men. I still wonder if they would have died anyway. If I had waited for the artillery, if I had followed orders, I'll never know. He met Morrison's eyes directly. But I know this. I made a decision. Men died. Other men lived. That's command. That's the job. Keller opened a drawer in the desk, pulled out 2 documents, set them on the table between them. I can file one of these, or both, or neither. He slid the first document forward. Court-martial papers, signed by Brennan's superior officer in the American command. They want disciplinary action. They want an example made. He slid the second document forward. Commendation for mission success, signed by Canadian Corps Commander. They want to recognize tactical excellence under pressure. Keller looked at Morrison. What do you think I should do, Sergeant? Morrison looked at both documents, thought about it, really thought about it. File the court-martial, sir. Keller's eyebrows rose slightly. Why? Because I was insubordinate. That's a fact. Colonel Brennan had legitimate authority. If we let soldiers ignore officers whenever they disagree, we don't have an army. We have chaos. Morrison's voice was steady. He meant every word. The chain of command matters. Discipline matters. If I get away with this without consequences, other sergeants will think they can do the same thing. Some of them will be right, some will be wrong. People will die either way, Keller nodded slowly. And the commendation? That's not for me to say, sir. I did my job. The mission succeeded. 3 men died. Those are the facts. Whether that deserves recognition isn't my decision. Keller studied him for a long moment. Then he picked up both documents and tore them both in half. Morrison watched the pieces fall onto the desk. Sir? You're learning, Morrison. Leadership isn't about being right or wrong. It's about judgment, knowing when to follow the rules and when the rules will get people killed. Keller gathered the torn pieces, dropped them in a waste bin. You had good judgment on that road. Your delivery was harsh. Your tone was insubordinate. But your assessment was correct, and your mission succeeded. He stood up. No court-martial, no commendation. You did your job. Now keep doing it. Morrison stood, saluted. Yes, sir. He turned to leave. Morrison, he stopped, turned back. Keller's face was hard again. All business. If you ever pull that stunt again, make sure you're right, because next time I might not tear up the papers. Understood, sir. Morrison returned to his company that evening. His men were dug in around the crossroads they had taken. 4 days of holding this position. They looked up when Morrison arrived, expectant. Well? His second-in-command asked. What happened with the general? Nothing happened. We have a war to fight. Some looked disappointed. They had wanted drama. But Morrison had no interest in giving them stories. He had work to do. First platoon, check your ammunition. Second platoon, rotate the watch. Third platoon, get some rest. We move out at 0600 tomorrow. The men dispersed, back to their duties. Morrison sat in his position, pulled out the notebook, opened to the page with 43 names. Henderson, McAllister, Kowalski. He thought about Henderson's letter, still in his pocket. The war continued. Nothing had changed, nothing ever changed. The war ground on. September 1944. Morrison's company fought through Belgium. The notebook gained 6 more names. October, the Scheldt estuary. Brutal fighting in flooded polders. 52 names now. November, more names, more letters, more boys who believed They would make it home. Morrison stopped counting after 58. The number did not matter anymore. Each name mattered, each face, each letter to each family. But the total, that was just mathematics, and mathematics had no soul. By the end, the notebook held 49 names, 49 boys who had trusted him, 49 letters to 49 families, 49 faces that still appeared in his dreams. May 8th, 1945, VE Day. Morrison stood in a Dutch town square surrounded by celebrating civilians. His company was down to 31 men. 31 survivors from the 80 who had followed him off that French road 9 months ago. The Dutch were dancing, singing, crying with joy. The war in Europe was over. Morrison's men celebrated too, drinking, laughing, slapping each other on the back. They had made it. Survived would be going home. Morrison stood apart from them, watching. He could not celebrate, could not feel the joy they felt. He pulled out the notebook, opened it. 49 names now. Morrison carefully tore out the pages with the names, folded them, put them in his breast pocket over his heart. "I'm taking you home," he whispered. One of his men approached, a corporal who had been with the company since D-Day. "Sarge, you all right?" "I'm fine, just tired." "We made it, Sarge. We actually made it." Morrison looked at the corporal, saw the joy in his young face. "Yes, you made it. Well done." The corporal smiled and went back to celebrating. Morrison stood alone in the crowd, surrounded by joy he could not feel, carrying names he could not forget. The war was over, but it would never be over, not for him. 1946, Saskatchewan. Morrison returned to his farm. His wife Mary met him at the train station. She looked older. The war had aged her too. They drove home in silence. What was there to say? He was back. That was enough. That night, Mary tried to ask him about the war. Morrison sat at the kitchen table, looked at his hands. "It's over," he said quietly. "That's all that matters." Mary knew better than to push. She had lived with him after the First War. She knew how this worked. The notebook with 49 names went into a drawer in his desk, locked. He did not look at it again. But he knew it was there. Could feel it. Like a weight that never lifted. The years passed. Morrison farmed, raised cattle, fixed machinery, did not talk about the war. He did not join veteran organizations, did not attend reunions. Sometimes at night he would wake and whisper the names to himself in the darkness. All 49, making sure he remembered. It was the least he could do. 1973, late summer. Morrison sat on the porch of his farmhouse. 61 years old now, grey hair, weathered face. His grandson came running across the yard, 12 years old, full of energy and questions. "Grandpa, Dad says you were in the war. He says you're a hero." Morrison smiled slightly. "Your dad talks too much." "Is it true? Were you a hero?" Morrison looked out at the wheat fields, golden in the afternoon sun. "I was a soldier. I did my job." "But Dad says you disobeyed orders once, that you stood up to a colonel." Morrison sighed. The story had followed him even here. "I made a decision, that's all." "What kind of decision?" Morrison thought about how to explain it. The kind of decision that meant some people lived and some people died. The kind you spend the rest of your life wondering about. The boy looked confused. "Did you ever regret it?" the boy asked. Morrison looked at his grandson, saw the youth there, the hope. "Every single day," Morrison said quietly. "But I'd do it again." "Why?" "Because the alternative was worse. Because boys were counting on me. Because someone had to make the decision." He paused. That's what leadership is, not being right, just being willing to decide and then carry whatever comes after. The boy did not understand. Not really, but someday, maybe, he would. The boy ran off to play. Morrison sat alone on the porch. A car pulled up the dirt road.